They say the cruelest things are always said with a smile. My family were masters of the art for 28 years. I was the family's resident disappointment, the rough draft to my sister Amelia's perfect final copy. It was a role I had learned to accept. Or so I thought. But there's a funny thing about being pushed into the shadows your whole life. You learn to see things that hide in the dark. My family was about to find out that the darkness had taught me more than they could ever imagine. The night I finally fought back wasn't with shouting or tears. It was at a quiet family dinner where I served them a cold dish of revenge, garnished with a terrifying secret that cost them everything. And it all started with $84,000. Stick around, and I'll tell you how I burned their perfect world to the ground without lighting a single match dot in my family. Worth wasn't measured in kindness or character. It was measured in polished silver, in the right postcodes, and in the husbands you managed to acquire. My parents, David and Carol, were architects of this belief system. They'd built their lives around the appearance of success, a meticulously curated facade of middle-class prosperity. And their masterpiece, their magnum opus, was my older sister. Amelia. Amelia was everything I wasn't. Where I was quiet and observant, she was loud and dazzling. Where I had a messy bun and paint-stained jeans from my pottery studio, she had a perfect blonde blowout and a closet full of designer labels. She married her university sweetheart, Mark, a man whose ambition was only matched by his smarmy grin and a firm handshake that always felt like a negotiation. They had the 2.5 kids well. 2 perfect children, the sprawling suburban house, and the holiday photos that looked like they were ripped from a catalog. They were my parents' dream come true, and then there was me. I was the artistic one, a label they used like an apology. I hadn't gone to a prestigious business school. I'd gone to art college. I didn't live in a gated community. I lived in a small, cluttered apartment above my own pottery studio, a modest business I'd built from scratch. To them, my life was a charming failure, a hobby that I stubbornly insisted on calling a career. The comparisons were constant, a slow drip poison administered at every family gathering. "Oh, Clara, that's a unique sweater," my mother would say, her eyes flicking to Amelia's cashmere twin set. "Did you make it yourself?" The question wasn't a compliment. My father was worse. He dealt in blunt force trauma. "Amelia and Mark are putting an offer on a lake house," he'd announce at Sunday dinner, beaming. Then he turned to me. "Still playing with mud for a living, kiddo?" It was 1,000 tiny cuts. They never saw the hours I poured into my work, the joy on a customer's face when they found the perfect piece, the quiet pride I felt in being self-sufficient. They only saw what I wasn't. I wasn't Amelia. The only person who ever truly saw me was my grandmother, my mother's mother. She was different. She smelled of cinnamon and old books and believed in things the modern world had forgotten. She'd visit my studio, her gnarled hands tracing the lines on a freshly thrown vase, and she'd whisper, "There's magic in this clay, Clara, magic in you. Don't let them stamp it out." When she passed away 2 years ago, it felt like the only light in my world had been extinguished. She left me a small inheritance and an old, unassuming wooden box. The money went into a savings account, a secret comfort. The box went into the back of my closet, a painful reminder of the one person I'd lost. The tension in the family was a low hum, always present. But it began to truly escalate when my parents' carefully constructed world started to show cracks. Their business, a high-end kitchen renovation company, was struggling. The economy had taken a downturn, and suddenly, nobody was spending $50,000 on Italian marble countertops. The stress made them even more brittle, more critical, and all their hopes, all their pressure, seemed to laser focus onto the one part of their legacy that was still perfect. Amelia. It was a Tuesday night when the call came. My mother's voice was strained, stripped of its usual condescending lilt. It was the voice of a woman genuinely afraid. "Clara, honey, can you come over? Your father and we need to talk to you." I found them in their showroom, a place usually gleaming with sterile perfection, now looking tired and dated under the harsh fluorescent lights. My father, a man I'd only ever seen as a pillar of booming confidence, looked small. He couldn't meet my eye. They laid it all out. Bad investments. A few clients who had defaulted on payments. A big loan from the bank was due, and if they couldn't pay it, they'd lose everything. The business. The house. The facade. "We need $84,000, Clara," my mother said, the words catching in her throat. "It's that exact amount. To the dollar." My blood ran cold. $84,000. It was the exact amount my grandmother had left me. My secret. How did they know? Had they been snooping? Or was it just a cruel cosmic coincidence? I don't have that kind of money," I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Don't lie to us, Clara," my father snapped, his desperation making him cruel. "Your grandmother wasn't exactly subtle about her favorite. We know she left you something. For 2 hours, they worked on me. They pleaded. They cried. For the first time in my life, they praised me. They told me I was resourceful, smart, the only one who could help them." My mother held my hands, her tears feeling unnervingly real. "You'd be saving this family," she whispered. "You'd be our hero." A part of me, the little girl who had spent her whole life craving their approval, started to listen. Maybe this was my chance. Maybe if I saved them, they would finally see me. See my worth. With a heavy heart and a stomach twisted in knots, I agreed. The next day, I transferred the entire $84,000 to their account. My grandmother's legacy. My safety net, gone. For a few weeks, it was like a dream. My mother called me every day. My father told me he was proud of me. They invited me to dinner, and for once, the conversation wasn't a competition between me and my sister. Amelia and Mark were there too, looking at me with a newfound, almost unsettling respect. I felt a warmth I hadn't realized I was starving for. I had finally earned my place at the table. The betrayal came about a month later. I was dropping off a birthday gift for my nephew at Amelia's house. I let myself in through the back gate, as I usually did, planning to leave it on the porch. But as I approached the kitchen window, I heard voices. My mother, my father, and Amelia. They were laughing. "I still can't believe it was that easy," Amelia said, her voice tinkling like ice in a glass. "She just gave it to you?" "Hook, line, and sinker," my father boomed, and the sound of his laughter made my skin crawl. Poor, naive Clara. She was so desperate to be the hero. My mother joined in. "Well, it's the most useful she's ever been. And honestly, it's better this way. Mark needed the money to cover those awful market losses, and this down payment secures the new house. What would Clara do with it anyway? Buy more mud?" They all laughed again. It wasn't just a joke. It was a dismissal of my entire existence. The money hadn't gone to the business. It hadn't saved them from ruin. They had lied. They had taken my grandmother's gift, my one piece of security, and handed it to the golden child to polish her already glittering life. I stood there, hidden by the rose bush, my body trembling. The birthday gift slipped from my hand and shattered on the stone patio. But I didn't care. The sound of my own heart breaking was louder. In that moment, I heard my mother say the words that would become my mantra, the fuel for the fire that was about to ignite inside me. "She's a sweet girl," my mother sighed, with a theatrical dose of pity. "But let's be honest. She's always been half the woman her." When I got home, I didn't sleep. I walked straight to my closet and pulled out the old wooden box my grandmother had left me. It was made of a dark, unfamiliar wood, with no lock, just a simple hinged lid. I'd never opened it. It felt too final, like closing a door on her memory. But now I pried it open with trembling fingers. The inside smelled of dried herbs and old paper. It wasn't filled with jewelry or keepsakes. It was filled with journals. Dozens of them, bound in cracking leather, their pages covered in my grandmother's spidery, elegant handwriting. Tucked between them were strange objects. A tarnished silver locket containing not a picture but a pinch of dark soil. A bundle of raven feathers tied with a red string and several small, corked glass vials filled with murky liquids and dried roots stopped my grandmother. It turned out was more than just a baker of cinnamon buns. She was a practitioner of what she called old ways, folk magic, sympathetic traditions, the belief that like attracts like, and that a strong enough will can bend the world around it. It wasn't about good or evil. It was about balance and consequence. I spent the next 3 nights devouring her journals, cross-referencing notes, a cold determination settling over me. My plan for revenge wouldn't be about getting my money back. That was trivial, insulting. No, my revenge would be a reflection of their own sin. Their sin was greed. So I would give them what they craved in such abundance that it would choke them. One journal described a ritual of the hungry coin. It wasn't a curse for poverty. It was a curse for insatiable, gnawing want. It was designed to amplify a person's greed until it consumed everything else in their life, their relationships, their reason, their peace. It would turn them into ghosts, forever chasing a fortune they could never quite grasp. The ritual required a personal link, a tag from each target. It was horrifyingly easy to get. From a sweater my mother had left at my apartment, I plucked a single strand of her hair. From my father's old coat in my hall closet, I snipped a loose button. And for Amelia, I used the memory of a hug she'd given me during their charade. A hug where one of her perfectly manicured nails had scratched my arm. I'd found the tiny sliver of pearly acrylic on my sleeve later that day. At the time, it felt like an insult. Now it felt like a gift. On the next new moon, I performed the ritual. In my studio, surrounded by the earthy smell of wet clay, I followed my grandmother's instructions to the letter. I placed the hair, the button, and the nail clipping into a small clay bowl I'd made myself. I added a pinch of soil from the locket, a drop of liquid from a vial labeled sorrow, and a single rusted penny. I chanted the words from the journal, my voice low and steady. The words felt foreign on my tongue, ancient and heavy. As I finished, the flame on the candle beside me leaped and twisted into a sickening green color before extinguishing itself, plunging the room into darkness. A profound cold washed over me. The trap was set. The effects were subtle at first. Mark, my brother-in-law, started bragging about a surefire stock tip. He poured a huge chunk of their new house fund into it. It tanked within a week. My father, desperate to save his business, was conned by a smooth-talking investor who vanished with the last of his operating capital. They became obsessed, frantic. Every conversation was about money they needed, money they'd lost, money they were about to make. Then the haunting began. Not with loud noises, but with quiet whispers. Amelia called me, her voice a nervous wreck. She said their new beautiful house felt ... wrong. Cold spots would drift through rooms. They'd hear faint music like an old music box coming from the empty nursery. She complained that all her jewelry kept tarnishing overnight, no matter how much she polished it. My parents were next. My mother became convinced that someone was getting into their house at night. She'd find chairs pulled out from the table, as if a guest had been sitting there watching them. My father started having nightmares, waking up screaming about a woman with dark eyes and dirt under her fingernails. demanding payment for a debt he didn't understand. I played my part perfectly. I was the concerned daughter, the supportive sister. I'd listen to their panicked phone calls with a calm, sympathetic voice. It's probably just the stress, I'd say, the words tasting like sweet poison. You all have a lot on your minds. They were so consumed by their hunger for money that they couldn't see what was right in front of them. They weren't just losing their finances. They were losing their minds. And the grand finale, the dinner where all debts would be called due, was fast approaching. I invited them all for dinner at my apartment, 1 year to the day after I had transferred them the money. I called it a clear the air dinner, a chance for a fresh start. They came reluctantly, looking haggard and worn. The past year had savaged them. Mark had been fired for making a reckless, unauthorized trade. Amelia's perfect hair was thinning, and dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes. My parents looked like ghosts, rattling around in clothes that were now too big for them. They sat stiffly around my small wooden table, the irony of eating a meal I'd paid for in my failed apartment seemingly lost on them. The small talk was excruciating. Finally, my father slammed his fork down. "I can't do this, Clara," he growled. "This little charade. We're drowning. The business is gone. Mark and Amelia are about to lose the house. And you sit here serving us pot roast like you haven't a care in the world. You could help us. You have your little business, your savings." My mother chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. "Your sister is suffering and you do nothing. Some daughter you are." I let the silence hang in the air, thick and heavy. I took a slow sip of water, then placed my glass down with a soft click. "You're right," I said, my voice eerily calm. "We should talk about money. Specifically, we should talk about the $84,000. Fear flickered in their eyes. That was a loan to save the family business. My father blustered. "No," I replied, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "It wasn't. It was my inheritance from Grandma, and you didn't use it to save the business. You used it to pay off Mark's gambling debts and for a down payment on a house you couldn't afford." "I know, I heard you." The blood drained from their faces. Amelia began to sob quietly. "I invested that money in this family," I continued, my gaze locking onto each of them in turn. "And I got a very poor return. But you misunderstood something vital. That money, it wasn't just money." The lights in my apartment began to flicker. A cold draft snaked through the room, though the windows were shut tight. Grandma believed in balance, in anchors. That money was an anchor. It was a lock on a very old door. It was a payment made every generation to keep something at bay. A debt collector for the soul. "What are you talking about?" Mark stammered, his face pale with sweat. "You're insane, am I?" I smiled, a real smile this time, and it was terrifying. "You took that lock and you spent it. You didn't just steal from me. You stole from her, and you left the door wide open." As I spoke the last word, the room plunged into an icy, suffocating cold. The light bulb above the table didn't just flicker. It exploded, showering the table in sparks and darkness. In the terrifying silence that followed, they saw her, standing directly behind my chair, where a second before there had been nothing but a wall, was the translucent figure of a woman. She looked like my grandmother, but gaunt, her skin stretched tight over her bones, her eyes empty, black pits, and her fingernails were caked with dark, wet soil. She wasn't looking at me. Her hollow gaze was fixed on them, a silent creditor come to collect a debt that could never be repaid and cashed out, my mother screamed, a raw, ragged sound of pure terror. My father scrambled backwards, his chair toppling over. They were trapped, not by me, but by the consequences they had laughed about over a glass of wine a year ago. I stood up and walked to the door, leaving them to their spectral guest. I didn't look back. I could hear their frantic, terrified sobs echoing down the hallway as I left, but they sounded very far away, like voices from another world. My world was quiet now. The revenge didn't bring me joy. It didn't bring me a rush of victory. It brought a profound, cold, and hollow peace. I didn't get my $84,000 back, but I didn't need it. I had my studio. I had my work. I had myself. My grandmother's real gift wasn't the money in the bank. It was the knowledge in the box. The understanding that there are older, deeper magics in the world than money and status. I never saw my family again. I heard through the grapevine that they lost everything, the house, the cars, their friends. They moved to a small rundown town, but the stories followed them. People said the family was cursed, haunted by relentless bad luck, by a creeping chill that no furnace could ever warm, and by the constant, nagging feeling of being watched by hungry, empty eyes. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, forever paying off a debt with their own peace of mind. They say blood is thicker than water, but they never tell you what happens when that blood is tainted by greed. It doesn't just run thin. It calls things up from the deep. So let me ask you, what would you have done in this situation?